Based on who you are, what you've experienced, and what you value, do the systems we exist in, our schools, our healthcare, our politics, reflect you? Were they built for you? Based on who you are, what you've experienced, and what you value, have the issues of injustice before us felt insurmountable? I co-lead a program called Public Achievement with 250 young people a year, offering a framework for youth to identify, investigate, and act on issues of injustice connected to their identities, experiences, and values. These young people take it into their own hands to not only challenge the structures and systems that keep so many of us from our own sense of possibility, but also to take loving action. Action that reminds all of us that what once seemed impossible can exist and become a part of us. There are 6 lessons from youth activism and the agency that it is that I believe if we were all tapping into in our own lives, our own circumstances, our humanity would be better off. We must be able to look within and make these kinds of changes ourselves in order to collectively transform the world into the ways that we dream it could be. The first lesson, don't wait for permission to act. I remind our students that there is no hierarchy to accessing change. You need not be elected, graduated, crowned, or ordained in order to start making change in your own life and in your own communities. Like Dorothy Cotton's song during the Civil Rights Movement maintains, we are the ones we've been waiting for. You see, we aren't teaching young people how to be powerful. We're facilitating a power that already exists. Together, we are co-creating and reimagining our circumstances where change and liberation are possible for our communities. A student once said to me, I just had someone refer to me as an accidental activist. In our work, we know that people rarely act accidentally. Many act with intent and too often don't measure the impact. Many have acted to design and resign us to systems and structures that are now requiring young people to march and organize yet again. We act because none of this was by accident. We must each be willing to not only critique injustices, but also inspire to take action on them. Even if we didn't create the problems with our own hands, doesn't mean that we don't have an awesome but necessary responsibility to not only make the world better for those who come after us, but also to respond to this urgent moment of now. Being passive is no longer an option for any future that really belongs to all of us. The second lesson, diversity is our greatest power and our greatest hope. The breadth of topics I see young people working on, immigration, mental health, climate crisis, poverty, gun violence, access to higher education. They are diverse because a diverse group of people are doing the work. Students are encouraged to center, not silence, their personal histories in order to make sense of the world around them and in order to address these intersectional issues that we currently face. In Trinidad and Tobago, my sister and I grew up going to the masjid at Eid, lighting diyas at Diwali, playing drums at Kwanzaa, all while getting reprimanded weekly, mostly me, by a nun at our Catholic primary school for talking too much. Our ancestors were indigenous, migrant indentured servants, enslaved, and a lover to the landowner alike. East Indian, West Indian, Carib, Scottish, Chinese, Afro-Caribbean. We came from a mother and grandparents who told us, you can be anything because you already are so many things. I shared this with a student once after they witnessed someone in a position of power at their school ask me, what are you? The student, who was working at the intersection of immigration and racism, said in response to me, so it's true that what this country has told you are is never all you have to be. As someone whose diversity and intersectional identities stem from ancestors who survived the Spanish encomienda system, the transatlantic slave trade, indentured servitude. That 500 years of generational trauma and generational resilience is what allows me to be standing here before you today, able to identify, shine light on, and address the wounds of racism and anti-Black racism, and just how pervasive they are in our society. Tolerating racism as though it's accepting of all thought, as though it's accepting of diverse points of view, is a falsehood. Tolerating racism perpetuates racism, and it does the exact opposite at actualizing any sense of belonging for our diverse and intersectional communities. The third lesson, our change is strengthened in community. I've yet to work with a young person whose activism wasn't primarily rooted in being a child, grandchild, sibling, mentee, or neighbor. It's these people and these relationships who star in our very first stories, who teach us about the things that we're passionate about and the issues we're willing to stand up and fight for, who remind us that when we show up and do the work, it is beyond the individual and for the collective. Our communities are beloved. They nurture us and they hold us accountable. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley said, "As you are tempted to forget who you are, you have to be surrounded by people, a community who reminds and emboldens you to lead uniquely and authentically, exactly as you are." The fourth lesson, your potential is always greater than the problem. When we engage young people at the beginning of our process, we invite them to radically imagine what the world should look like. And then together, we build steps on what we can do to arrive there. Each of us have inherent knowledge and inherent power inside of us, from our DNA from generations long before us, and our roots, in our oral histories, and our lived realities. We have inherent power and inherent knowledge that institutions and structures weren't yet built to teach us. We each have an innate capacity to do and be even more than the thing or the status quo that is facing us. Toni Morrison said, "As you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think." Education is not typically a liberatory space. Programs like public achievement exist because the system in place is not doing the work. As any of us are positioned to respond to issues that are bigger than ourselves, we have to make sure that we aren't just trying to compensate for a broken system, but that our actions work to change it. Placing Band-Aid solutions on things like our schools, our healthcare, our politics, in order to achieve a nearby or easier outcome is not committing to the vision of what the world should be, and it's not committing to long-term change. No one can yet tell you how to be great. This country and our world, our history is rooted in recognizing that we have the potential to be far better than our worst. But our history is also not necessarily behind us and shows we have quite a ways to go together. Equity, dignity, and justice have yet to be actualized. We must not fear our capacity to radically reimagine our world, because the foundation that we currently stand on has still allowed for this status quo, where possibilities are cut short and taken. Individually and collectively, we have to remember that we are more limitless than we are limited, that our potential that is becoming is always greater than the problem or the status quo that is before us. I am, you are, our students are so powerful, and we are beings of possibility. And often, this can be guided by something we cannot see, our purpose, our ancestors. As you think lovingly of the people you descended from, know that we are ascending because of the love and resilience they gave us. The fifth lesson, tension creates change. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. James Baldwin. Activism, change-making, you being fired up, exists because there is tension between your personal narrative, the wholeness of you and your community's existence, and the status quo. These tensions are uncomfortable. They cause deep societal harm, but they also offer direct possibilities. Through addressing these tensions, we can more clearly imagine what our world could look like. Through addressing these tensions, we can better arrive at justice. But we have to be willing to face them. Waiting until tension becomes crisis means that we've waited too long. We all have to be willing to make change, even as we feel uncomfortable. For all people to not only have their breath, but to breathe. To not only be able to lead movements in order to free themselves of shackles, but to be able to move and dance. We are all here. We exist yet. And our visibility makes us undeniable. Lastly, the sixth lesson. Investigate your identities, experiences, and values. Tell your story. My first year out of college, a single day was spent, in part, with 4th and 5th grade African American and Black students doing the work that we do, but in Minnesota. One young woman, when I approached and asked her why does she do public achievement, planted firmly in her feet, lifted her chin, and told me proudly that public achievement allowed her to achieve herself in public. Working on increasing access to inhalers because more students and families in her community had severe asthma than they did have access to health insurance. Part 2 of this day, I sat in a glaring bright room in a circle in the presence of story with 35 incarcerated men, mostly men of color. For hours, they shared parts of who they are, what pain they've had to heal inside, what they value, and what they hope to do with knowing how to name all of this. The same work that we do was in action there as well. So many of the men could not believe that young people were being engaged with a willingness to not disregard the students' identities and stories at the door, but to center them. Many shared of not being seen, intervened, or supported when they were that age, of not being seen as having value or promise in an educational system that continues to fail to tell the pledge of communities of color. And at the very least, not being told of the structures around them, not built to serve them, but to eventually confine them. This moment felt like it could have been a cookout, a gathering with my friends and family, our classroom. But instead, we were able to leave, and these men required to stay, asking us to please share their stories with the young people. When I returned home from this trip, I wrapped my arms around my body, I held myself, and I cried. Who am I to hold these stories? I realized I had yet to stand in the truth of my own. I had some work to do. To achieve our full selves in public, we have to be able to tell about the experiences that have shaped us with authority and power and without shame. Sharing your story and holding someone else's story has the capacity to move us from isolation to solidarity, from structures of power over to power with and power within. Sharing your story and holding someone else's story is a great responsibility, and one that offers our world a better chance. The rest of the Dorothy Cotton song, "We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For," continues on to say, nobody else, nobody else, nobody else is going to rescue us. History books don't remind us of our resilience and brilliance. The resilience and brilliance that has held democracy accountable from generation to generation. Old forms of leadership don't remind us that we don't need saving, but we do need to do the work. Chances are, if you were able to answer yes to my first question tonight, there's a possibility that you can move through life without having to confront the realities of an ongoing list of marginalizations and systemic oppressions that so many young activists do. That Black, Indigenous, people of color, folks with disabilities, immigrants, undocumented folks, LGBTQ+ folks, and so many others do. But you must. These tensions cause more than not getting a job, being late to an event, or maybe being unfollowed on your social media. They endanger our very existence, and they endanger the fabric of our collective humanity. Social change can too often be misplaced as this or those people's problem, or too radical of a vision, especially during election years. But every single person has a lot to gain from change, because no matter what, we all benefit from not learning and surviving in a racist, homophobic, misogynistic, patriarchal, sexist, and fatally unhealthy society, but thriving in a just, healing, and equitable one. And until it's achieved, so long as some of us can breathe freely in the same atmosphere that harms or kills another, these problems really do belong to all of us. You can begin by setting aside your own self-doubt and not waiting on yourself, by not only holding criticism, but inspired to take necessary action, by investing in learning about your friends, your family, your community, your ancestors, by tapping into all of the parts that make you, you, and extending that dignity to others' intersectional identities too. By not getting caught in the microcosm of your daily life and remembering that you are part of something bigger. And when tension is present, ask, what are you here to teach me? And see what kind of change takes place. And learn how to tell your story. And disallow anyone else to write it for you. John Lewis said, you have to tell the whole truth, the good and the bad. Maybe some things that make some people uncomfortable. We do, in fact, stand on the shoulders of giants. I know my ancestors made room for me to thrive. But we also stand pressured under the weight of policies and structures designed largely by small hearts and minds. When I wrote this talk, our communities hadn't yet confronted COVID-19. When I wrote this talk, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, and George Floyd still had their breath. But Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Tatiana Jefferson, and Elijah McClain, and about 2,000 other Black lives since 2013 that we know of did not, as a result of white supremacy and police violence. The roots of injustice are so pervasive in so many of our daily lives, and they were here long before this health and racism crisis. But these particular crises and our environmental crisis are mobilizing more and more of us to see what's necessary to change and just how high the stakes are. To the young people, this is the continued and necessary work. Our very agency to act is what holds us all accountable to actualizing liberty and justice for all. We are a generation making room to thrive, and our agency is transformative, and it is love. Love for your ancestors, love for self and community, and love for those to come. To the young people, your tempo guides our steps.